This presentation is an introduction to the Women of Troy, its key ideas and strategies for studying the text. In this tutorial, you'll learn about what types of essay topics you can expect, the structure and characters of the play, the key ideas in the play, and how to think about the ideas as you study the play. First, let's have a look at the essay topics. Here are typical essay topics you can expect to be asked to write on as you study this play and at an end of a unit on this play. Just take a moment to read through them now. All of these questions somehow revolve around how the women at the centre of this play are victims of war and victims of the treatment of the Greeks, and how they respond to this victimisation, the types of bravery, courage, dignity or grief they show. Let's have a think about the structure of the play. Even though the edition of the play that you're reading isn't divided into acts or sections, there actually are 5 distinct sections in this play. And it's important to understand that this play does have a structure because it will help you dissect and understand the development of messages throughout this play. The play begins with a prologue, and in the prologue we witness a conversation between Poseidon and Athena, and we're introduced to how the gods think and feel about human affairs. In this prologue, we're also introduced to Hecuba. She's the main character in this play. She feels a sense of grief and indignity about what's happened very strongly. She features throughout the whole play. And in each subsequent section of the play, she engages essentially in a conversation and a dialogue with another character. In the first episode, she talks with Cassandra, and Cassandra has a different view about the situation they're in to Hecuba. Cassandra thinks that this situation they're in should be celebrated because she can actually use this situation to take a violent revenge upon the Greeks who've inflicted great pain and suffering upon them. In the second episode, Hecuba talks to her daughter-in-law Andromache, who's married to her son Hector. Andromache talks about how people who have died are better off than the people who are living. The people who are living are still suffering, whereas the people who are dead have been relieved of that suffering. In episode 3, Hecuba talks with Helen. Helen is the catalyst for this whole war. She is the wife of Menelaus, who ran away to have an affair with Paris, the Trojan prince Paris. And that action launched the Trojan War because Helen's husband, Menelaus, came to get her back. In episode 3, Helen tries to defend her actions and to convince Menelaus that she, Helen, shouldn't be executed. Whereas Hecuba, who is furious at the position that Helen has put them in, argues the case about why Helen should in fact be executed. So there are these 3 distinct episodes where Hecuba engages in a dialogue or a conversation with 3 different women, and essentially they discuss the position they're in and the different types of feelings they have about the position they're in. When you write about this play, you can write about the prologue, and you would call it a prologue, and you can refer to episode 1 where Hecuba discusses, converses, enters into a dialogue with. And you can refer to episode 2 and episode 3, where Hecuba talks with Helen. So by labeling them as episode 1 or episode 2 or episode 3, that will allow you to locate the particular points in the play that you're referring to. Alright, what are the key ideas in the play? It's really important at the start of a unit or at the start of studying Trojan women that you have a sense of what types of essay tasks you're going to be asked to respond to and what types of themes and ideas drive the play and drive the essay tasks, because you need to be constantly thinking about the ideas as you read through the play. All essay topics come back to key ideas, and as you read through the play, you always need to be thinking about the key ideas that you're going to be ultimately asked to write about in your essays. There are 6 key ideas throughout the play, and you can see here that the key ideas are actually an exploration of 2 opposing attitudes or aspects. So there's freedom and slavery, and there is the idea that when we're free, our life is hopeful and has dignity and has meaning, but when we're enslaved, like happens to the women of Troy, life becomes hopeless and life is undignified. Each of the other themes also has opposing aspects that are explored, and we're going to look at those in a bit more detail over the next few slides. Perhaps the most important idea throughout this whole play is freedom and slavery. The women constantly come back to the idea of slavery. They constantly talk about their position or their futures as slaves, and they see that this life of slavery that is before them is perhaps the most tragic and the most inhumane thing that can happen to them, and they're terrified by this idea of slavery. Here's a very typical quote about slavery from Hecuba. Just take a moment to read through it. Okay, there's a couple of interesting things going on in this quote. Firstly, the idea of slavery is something that is misery for Hecuba. Secondly, she likens slavery to being like a drone in the hive. There are a number of symbols that are used throughout the play, and one of them is of animals. And reducing people to slaves is reducing them to an animal-like existence, which Hecuba talks about here. Something else she also talks about in this quote is that being a slave is like the image of death. And what she means by this is that you're not really alive. Basically, you're dead. Okay, you look like you're alive, but actually you're really dead. So to be a slave is to lead only half a life or not a life at all. So this fear and terror of slavery and this conception of slavery as an animal-like existence, an existence that isn't really life at all, fuels and underpins so much of the discussion and dialogue between the women throughout this play. And you can in fact see that all of the ideas, all of the key themes in this play somehow connect to or grow out of this key conflict between wanting to be free but having slavery inflicted upon you. So For example, an important idea in the play is, are we, as individuals, free to construct our own fate and our own lives, or is fate, are we simply the slaves of a fate, of the fate inflicted upon us by the gods and the universe? Are we slave to our feelings? Can we be rational, or do our emotions always control us? What leads us to be inhumane and savage in war, and to treat people in an undignified way and enforce slavery upon them? And can life actually have any meaning and any hope when we're enslaved? So all of these ideas relate to each other. Let's have a look at some of these other ideas in a little bit more detail, so you know the types of things that you need to think about as you read through the play. So the play begins with a discussion between the gods, and throughout the play, the women return to this question of how much have the gods helped them, or how much do the gods control their lives. And John McKee's first quote here, "The gods always hated us," is a very typical quote from the play, and it's this idea that they're being punished by the gods. The gods control their lives, and they're inflicting this punishment, or this life of misery upon them, because gods don't like humans. Then there is another quote from Hecuba, "O you gods, what good were you to us?" And there's this idea throughout the play that these Trojan women and the Trojans collectively have prayed to the gods, they've worshipped the gods, they've given sacrifices